additional gifts. They have additional gifts.
Do you need water? Anybody need water?
I'm good, thanks.
I'm good, thank you.
Actually, I do.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah,
Email, I just.
no problem.
We just-
Yeah, no problem.
Spreading that
For
everywhere.
my 401k should be rolling your way.
How long were you there?
Almost 3 years. I put the next with the road and stuff. It was good. This is like 40 a year.
Really? Good match, huh?
Just good growth.
Really?
Nothing. The last three.
You made it.
Thank you.
Very, very much. Everybody's taking that here, which I mean we did ours, but it's not a bad. Very good.
And that's kind of neat. We're worried about one, but the other. Had a little.
Can you set up, so, you have some random neighbor and you want to set up a 5. That you just have to.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regular Belton City Council meeting for Tuesday, June 8, 2021. This afternoon, the Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag will be led by Councilmember Guy O'Banion. The Texas pledge will be led by Public Information Officer Paul Romer, and I will be giving the invocation. Join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day in Belton. Thank you for the rains. Thank you for the folks gathered here tonight, and please continue to guide us and lead us and help us to make wise decisions as we represent the needs of our citizens in our own community. Help those in special need. Forgive us when we fail thee. In Christ's name we ask you. Amen. Amen. All right, we are on. Any public comments this evening? Items 3 through 7 on this under the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the council and may be enacted by one motion. If discussion is desired by the council, any item may be removed from the consent agenda prior to voting. At the request of any council member, it will be considered separately. Item 3, to consider the minutes of previous meetings, the May 25th, 2021 council meeting and the May 26th, 2021 City Council Strategic Plan Workshop meeting. Item 4, to consider an appointment to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we are appointing Nicole Fisher to replace Ty Hendrick, who is moving out of the city limits. We appreciate Ty's service in the past. Look forward to having Nicole on that committee. Item 5, consider authorizing the city manager to execute the Temple Belton Wastewater Treatment Plant Odor Control Settlement Agreement. Item 6, consider a facade improvement grant application to renovate the property at 110 North Main Street. And item 7, consider authorizing the city manager to execute the amended and restated communications agreement between Bell County and the cities of Belton, Harker Heights, Killeen, and Temple. Does anyone wish to pull any of those items? If not, I would appreciate a motion.
I move we approve items 3 through 7 as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously.
Good luck on the new place, Luke.
Look forward to seeing how it's going to turn out. Item 8, consider authorizing the city manager to execute an amended professional services agreement with Casberg, Patrick and Associates for design modifications to Phase 2 improvements to the Temple Belton wastewater treatment plant. And staff report from Public Works Director Angela Points.
All righty. Many of you know the background, but we do have a few new council members, so we'll just go through this real quickly. The Temple Belton Wastewater Treatment Plant is located off of FM 93. The treatment plant itself serves about 70% of all of Temple, and it serves 100% of Belton sewer flows. The plant itself is permitted to treat 10 million gallons average daily flow and up to 30 on a peak flow day. Temple's flow that goes to this plant makes up 75% of all of the flow, and Belton makes up 25% of the total flow. So that's how we determine the cost share of ownership and therefore payment for services, design, operations, therefore. So Belton, of all the total costs to operate the plant, design the plant, Belton pays 25% of that. There's been a lot of work done at the plant. Essentially, when the flows at the plant reach 75% of that permitted capacity, you have to be under design to expand the plant. And that trigger was met back in 2010. Oops. There we go. So again, a little history. When that trigger was met, the cities went into preliminary engineering in 2011 with KPA. And that presented all the things that had to happen to the plant. In 2013 to 2014, there was some value engineering done, some studies to see was that the right decision, to give both cities some comfort to that. And then in phase 1, the design was proceeded in October 2015. So phase 1 is just what has been completed. That replaced the headworks facility, the odor control units, which are in progress, in all of those necessary services. That project addressed the major bottleneck of the plant, and that was the headworks condition and capacity. Basically, the headworks was falling apart. If you guys remember me talking about that years ago, the concrete was very much like Play-Doh. You could almost grab it if you were brave and pull it apart. I mean, it was not in good condition. And also it was the bottleneck of the plant. It really constricted the capacity. So phase 1 was to replace that structure, and we did so at a total cost of about $13 million. And again, our share is 25%, 3.2. So you'll see both of these costs in my entire presentation. I'll show you the total cost and Belton's share. So it's worth noting that phase 1 did not increase the capacity of the plant. We took the first treatment unit that was a bottleneck and fixed that. Here's a before and after photo. Let me get my pen here. So on the left is the before, and after you can see the brand new headworks facility. There's a new road. We took down the existing, and then we converted the old aerobic digesters to an equalization basin. Essentially, it helps us when the flows are super high, we can divert some of the flow, which helps the entire capacity of the plant. So tonight we are bringing to you a contract for phase 2 design. So again, a little history. Contract amendment number 1 was awarded in 2016. Okay, so during design of phase 1, we started design of phase 2. And that phase 2 design scope included what was agreed upon back in 2015 in the preliminary engineering report. That included additional biological treatment units, DIS filters, UV disinfection. And the goal would be to increase the capacity of the plant. These units that were identified in the preliminary engineering report in 2015 assumed the plant would have a total phosphorus limit. So TCEQ, the state, would have, we assumed that by 2021, we would have to treat to a total phosphorus limit, which is basically why we needed disc filters and UV disinfection. The plant received their permit in 2020, and we did not receive a total phosphorus permit. Okay. Nor was in that permit, did we receive any sort of guidance on how to sample for total phosphorus. Sometimes with these treatment plants, you will get some sampling requirements. You may not get the requirement, but when you get those sampling requirements, that's TCEQ saying, hey, you're about to get a total phosphorus limit, but we did not even get that. The total cost for construction alone for what was designed was about $35 million. Belton's share would be 8.8. So very, very substantial. When we did not get a total phosphorus limit in 2020, we took a look at what was designed. And we said, we can get rid of the disc filters and we can get rid of UV, but we still needed those biological treatment units. In order to delete those things from the design and basically modify the design plans, we will have to spend some money for that. And that's what's before you today. That's contract amendment number 3, the design costs to modify the plans to remove the disc filters and UV disinfection. Okay. That design contract is $432,000. Belton's share is $108,000. Doing so, we reduced the overall construction costs from $35 million to $30 to $31 million. So we reduced the costs by about $4 to $5 million by making these changes. So again, spending a little money to, and I use this word lightly, save a little money. We just won't spend that $4 to $5 million. So this would be the scope of phase 2. We would, the headworks is already there. We did design 4 treatment trains. We would have to install a new screen inside of that and a grit removal, basically just flop it in there where we've got space. We will need a new biological treatment. That stays the same. It's an IFAS unit, it's a biological treatment unit. We will have to construct a new clarifier. That's the same as phase 1, what we had. Install a gravity thickener. That's the same as what we had. What changes is the downstream. We will take out in the, we'll take out in the plans the filters in the UV. So that will not be in this design. But we will have to add a little bit to our chlorine and dechlorination facilities because we're not doing UV. We currently use chlorine and sulfur dioxide to dechlorinate the wastewater. We'll have to add on to those facilities because we are adding capacity to the plant. I will note that these changes, I believe, are worthwhile. If in 2025, in 2030, 2035, we get a total phosphorus limit, nothing that we do right now is in vain. We can either add upon them or slightly modify them when that time comes. Here's a very large summary of the costs we spent to date on design services only at the treatment plant. So it includes phase 1, phase 2, construction administration services so far, including tonight's action item. So design services so far at the plant have been $4.5 million, and Belton's share, if this is awarded tonight, would be near 1.2 million. And then I've listed the construction costs that we have spent so far and what we expect to spend. So quite a big investment into the treatment plant. Also, as far as timing, if awarded tonight, we would start modifying the plans for phase 2. Actually, schedules here. And we would estimate completion of the design in fiscal year 2022. And it takes quite a long time to get that TCEQ permit. We expect it by 2023, and we would begin construction of phase 2 in 2023. And this has all been discussed with Mr. Listy and Mr. Rogers in their financial planning for potential bond issuance at that time. It will take quite some time to complete phase 2, which I project 2025. All of those things will be brought to you when the construction contract is brought to you. Financially, the construction administration or contract admin that we've talked about tonight for 108,000 can be funded right now from the Water and Sewer Capital Fund project. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know that's a lot of money and a lot of work has gone into this, but again, happy to answer any questions you would have. And Tommy Valley from KPA is here as well and able to answer questions if I'm not able to.
So I've got a quick question. So if we do this, I mean, you said it's all going to be needed. And so if we have to add something down the road, am I correct in kind of assuming that if we don't have to add a bunch of capacity down the road, that what we will have to add will be a much cheaper price tag? Because it seems like this stuff was the bulk of the big price tag, and those items aren't saving us a lot right now. But so I'm assuming that price tag to add them later is not going to be near what this is.
That's correct, because this gives us another 6 million gallons a day treatment capacity. And then you're right. If we get a total phosphorus limit, then all we're adding is essentially some tertiary treatment and sludge treatment, which are not as expensive because all the framework is put in. Basically, it's putting the structures there, interconnecting the pipe.
That's always possible that with construction and growth and everything else, we may have to add some more capacity, at some point too, which will be a big price tag as well. But
Correct. I think that's going to be quite a ways down the road, though. I haven't run those numbers.
But this should cover us for a while.
For a long time. Yes, sir. I think this gets us from 10 to 16 million gallons a day average, and then a peak from 30 to 52, Tommy? 47 to 52.
43 plus the EQ, so you're in the 51 to 52 million gallons. Right now, you're about 38 is what we handle.
Okay, thank you.
The only follow-up I had was you'd talked about the estimate for our portion would have been 8.8 or something around 8 million. And now we're going to save roughly the 4 to 5. So your new estimate of 8, that accounts for the savings for the 2023.
Let me go back to that. Let's make sure we're talking about the same thing here.
So for phase 2, yeah.
That's our
35
new
million, 8.8
contribution.
million. Okay, there it is. I see it. I didn't get that far when I was on that
It's
slide.
okay.
Thank you.
It's okay.
Just one question. We've probably talked about it before, but when you're doing all the figures for how much we're putting into the system, what's the average for a homeowner? Do we know that?
Are you asking the average of this impact to homeowners?
No, just the average. How much does the average home, if we add 5,000 homes and
Right.
X amount of people, do we have any
Well-
idea of how much that impacts, how much we put through the system?
I do know that. I don't know that off the top of my head.
I
yes.
can understand why. That's not something you sit around and
Yes.
talk about over
We do
coffee.
have those assumptions that we use in the master plan that the city of Belton has adopted. And I'd be glad to get that to you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'd consider-
Maybe one quick question,
Okay,
and
go
that
ahead.
is, help me understand how the system relates to homes and businesses within the city limits and outside of the city limits. And the reason I'm asking that is the state is sort of shrinking our ability to expand our homes. Will that have any kind of effect on the potential growth of the system or the lack of the growth of the system? And will we be making provision more and more for folks outside the city limits?
It's a great question. Okay. A lot of times when I get asked that, I go to sewer CCN, so our service area is not limited by our city limits. But I also understand that we do see a lot of growth in our ETJ. A lot of times we don't see the density in our ETJ, but we have recently with River Farms and Creation of the Mud. So we basically assume, when we assume sewer plant capacity and design and out years, we don't necessarily, to be conservative, we don't say, okay, we're limited in annexation, so therefore we think growth is going to slow down because of the fact that sewer certificated areas go beyond city limits. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Angela, do we also continue to evaluate the 75-25 as we move forward?
We do. We evaluate that at least annually, if not every 6 months. We have frequent meetings with the BRA, and they actually report to me monthly on the flows, and it's day to day on flows that come from both Belton and Temple. But right now we are, I think, in the positive. So sometimes we do a little bit more than 25%. Sometimes, yeah.
So a lot of the capital projects that we did, I know now we're chasing rabbits, but the capital projects that we did was to decrease the amount of rainwater getting into the system on these peak events.
That's right.
So we've had quite a bit of rain lately. I'm assuming that those efforts have been successful in reducing those flood events.
They have, yes.
Okay.
City of Belton is has a great sewer system as far as what we call I&I, inflow and infiltration. So we do not have the sewer overflows at manholes and lift stations like maybe our neighbors do. And a great example of that is the Old Waco Road sewer line. We used to have overflows in those manholes. We have not had one since.
That's great.
Same with Shady Lane. We used to have overflows in Shady Lane quite often. We haven't had one
That's good.
during the rain anytime. Even when there's grease clogged up in there, the sewer system's been able to handle it.
Very good.
Well, I know Temple's replacing a lot of theirs as well, which should help the overall capacity of our plant.
Temple's doing an excellent job. They are actually under a decree from TCQ. They're mandated to do those things. But Scott and I met with their assistant public works director 2 or 3 weeks ago and said that their conditions are incredible. Like they're just getting so much better. They're doing an excellent job. And again, like you're right, that is helping the treatment plant as well.
Anyone else? If not, I would entertain a motion for item number 8.
I move we approve item 8 as presented.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item 8 passes unanimously. Item 9, fiscal year 2022 budget. We're going to conduct a work session on FY 2022, including but not limited to the following funds: the general fund, the debt service fund, the information technology fund, the building maintenance fund, and the hotel motel fund. Mr. Rogers, you're going to
I'll
hand
make a
it off.
few. I'll make a
Hand it over
few,
to
First leg.
first
I'll make a
leg.
few initial comments and
All
then
right.
I'll hand it off to Mike. All right. So appreciate it very much. Thanks, Mayor and council members. I've just got a few comments to kind of get us started as we begin our first session on the annual operating budget. You recall from our strategic plan session, at that time, we were looking at trends, looking at multi-year projections of kind of what to expect. Tonight, we began our process of the annual budget review and looking forward to kind of going through that with you, giving you a sense of kind of what we're seeing at this particular point in time. And certainly a little different this year as opposed to last year. We had a lot of uncertainties last year with COVID, not as dramatic this year, while there certainly may be some lingering effects. The revenue sources appear to be stabilizing substantially, and that has helped us as we put the budget together for this year. Certainly there are some increased costs, and you'll see some details of that tonight, particularly in the area of personnel services, resulting in increases in salary, health insurance, and retirement expenses. The revenue projections that you'll see tonight reflect about a 7% increase in property taxes based upon a stable 63-cent tax rate. Again, that's preliminary that we're using just for budget development. Sales tax remain solid and strong. We're seeing about a 6% increase overall from last year. And then the important input the council gave us as we were going through analyses during the spring, particularly in the area of fire department and police department personnel changes, the increase in health insurance costs that we brought to you, the civil service and merit adjustments, and 7% participation in TMRS for a full year will add just under $1 million to the budget for fiscal year 22. A couple of other key objectives that we've tried to include in the budget or have included involve the resiliency measures that we brought to you previously regarding the winter storm after action report. We've added some part-time assistance in the Parks Department. We hope to fund an external comprehensive personnel study. For the first time, we're including in the annual budget a long time request of the council to fund the street maintenance program at the $500,000. Not to say we can't add more, but we've tried to include that in the operating budget. And so we're pleased to be able to do that. And then the budget also continues funding capital equipment replacement fund, which has been very successful in the efforts to address those needs over time. Since the department goals were presented at the May 26th strategic plan session, department heads will be here and available to answer any questions you might have on their budgets, but they will not make presentations today. As the council has requested, an analysis of our fund balance policy is in development, and we'll present that to you in the very near future. And then finally, the American Rescue Plan funding opportunities will be presented for council action when we get the final guidance from the state. We're continuing to check that regularly. We do have 3 years to spend that money, so we're not in quite a hurry, but you won't see, at the moment at least, incorporating elements of that, those dollars, those very significant dollars, into the budget at this time. Certainly, as the budget development evolves, we may be able to incorporate some of that as we go forward. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and continue this process.
Thank you. Well, good evening, council. Here we are again, kicking off budget. I think I'm probably better prepared this year than last year. This year I wore a cup, so that should make this go a lot smoother for me. So tonight I wanted to talk about these funds that we have kind of done preliminary budgets for. The general fund, debt service fund, 2 internal service funds, the IT and building maintenance funds, and then a special revenue fund, the hotel motel fund. So first, let's start off with where we think we're going to end in 21 for the general fund. So in March of this past year, we did a budget amendment number 1, where after we received the coronavirus money, CARES Act money, to reimburse us for expenditures that occurred in 20, we amended the budget for 21 to basically use that excess reserves that happened, you'll see that soon, to draw down that balance, essentially. So let's see if I can do this. Our amended budget in revenue is $15,879,000. In our amended expenditures, we added $250,000 to revenue. We added $1.37 million to expenditures in fiscal year 21. Our originally adopted budget was this $15,381,000. Now, the 2 big components of that $1.3 million amendment were $750,000 for street maintenance and then $330,000 for 13th Street sidewalks, so we could cash fund our grant match to have that money already available. So that makes up most of that budget amendment number 1. There were some other items that were added to that, but those are the 2 major ones. So if we look at where we might end this year, revenues are looking like they're going to come in just over $16 million. So about $200,000 surplus in revenues. Expenditures may come in right around $16,259,000 or $500,000 or so under budget and expenditures. So instead of using $879,000 of reserves, we could end up using only $165,000. But again, we still have 3 months in this fiscal year. There's still some things that may pop up before then. So what's driving those? On the revenue side, construction permits are doing better than we expected. Property tax payments, about $90,000 more in delinquent property taxes than we expected. And sales tax, even though we added $250,000 in revenue for budget amendment 1, we still may surpass that that number by the end of the year. On the expenditure side, public safety didn't have as many people retire, which means we didn't have to pay out leave like we thought, like we typically have to do, as much leave. And then we have had fewer contingency type things come up. And then pay plan changes at the end of the year, we added 335,000 to pay plan changes, which is essentially in that contingencies account. And because we're looking better in the expense side, I have not had to use that pay plan change number to make other departments stay within budget. Again, we'll see how that shakes out by the time we get to the end of the year. But if that comes true, we could end this fiscal year with just under $7 million of spendable fund balance. Our preliminary budget for fiscal year 22 has revenues of $16,886,000 and expenditures of $16,750,000. So we would have maybe a slight increase again to fund balance that would put us just over $7 million at the end of 22. How that looks in kind of a graph, what I wanted to show you here is, this is a chart of our fund balance, spendable fund balance, unassigned fund balance, if you will, and the general fund over time. And these bars here represent the dollar amount, and you can see that we've remained fairly close to $5 million since 2015. And then all of a sudden we had this large jump that you see here in 2020. Well, that is when we received that, we were planning, well, let me back up. We got CARES Act money, right? Or the allocation for CARES Act money, $1.2 million. And so what we did at the end of 20 was we moved $972,000 of personnel costs out of the general fund and into the grant fund while we awaited that reimbursement. And so accordingly, and sales tax outperformed what we thought. So that's why you have this large $2 million jump in fiscal year 20. In 21, where we sit now, again, I was expecting to have kind of a downward push of fund balance after we did budget amendment number 1, but it looks like we may be holding, somewhat steady. Now, if we go then forward to 22, we could still end up with this $7 million mark. The blue line that you see here is our minimum reserve requirement. Our minimum reserve requirement in the general fund is 25% of budgeted expenditures. So when you see this right here, that number, our minimum fund balance requirement in the general fund is around $4 million. You can compare that up here to where we kind of project we might stand, around 7 million. So essentially we're $3 million over the minimum fund balance in accordance to our policy. Now I can tell you in coming meetings as we go forward, especially when we start talking capital projects with the CIP again, we're going to come back to you with some ideas on that right there.
But not only did we complete our wish list that we had talked about using fund balance with, we grew our fund balance.
Correct.
And completed our wish list.
Correct.
What a year.
That's right.
Correct.
Who would have thought it?
Made a wish list. 3 million in excess of funds.
I have that for you. I have that for you. So anyway, yes, we're going to talk about that as we start talking capital projects in the coming weeks about what we can do with some of that. Okay, so what I want to do first is look at general fund revenue, and that's by category. Over here, you see the kind of the categories of revenue that we have: property tax, sales tax, franchise, permit fees, et cetera. This column you see right here is the fiscal 21 budget as amended. And so we have $15,879,000 budgeted in fiscal year 21. This column here is our kind of where we expect to end the fiscal year. You can kind of go through there and see differences, kind of where our year end might be compared to what we budgeted. This column here is the budget, preliminary budget for fiscal year 22. And obviously then this column is the change from the fiscal year 21 budget to the fiscal year 22 budget. So in the end, the fiscal year 22 budget is $16,886,000. And that's about $1 million increase over the amended fiscal year 21 budget. So what's causing, well, I hadn't got to that. So that breaks down 44% of our revenue comes from property taxes. 22% of that number, of that 16.8 million comes from sales taxes. Service charges are primarily waste management, trash pickup type stuff. So let's talk about some of these revenue items. Velcat has provided us with a preliminary estimated taxable value, kind of like their estimate of where they think we'll end the year, or where, what's the final number going to be. And the number that they gave us a month or so ago was $1,529 million, which is essentially a 7.2% increase over the previous year. Now last year we went up, 14%. So this 7%, you remember from previous conversations, that's kind of getting us closer to normal in our growth. Now, with that number, I do not yet know how much of that is TERS. I do not yet know how much of that is new value. But the preliminary budget that you see tonight is based upon a tax rate of 63 cents. It's based upon a TERS component growing 15% from 21 to 22, which has been the short-term growth of the TERS. May or may not be that, but I have to use some number to get to the general fund. And it also assumes my assumptions for the fiscal year 22 revenue on property tax assumes new growth or added value to the rolls of about $32 million. That's been kind of what we've run for the last 2 or 3 years, is around $32 million. So if that $32 million comes in of the $509,000 increase to property tax revenue, about 200,000 of that would come from new value that's been added to the rolls. So almost half of that would be new value. Looking at this on a quick chart, this is the property tax history since 2015. You can see the blue component there is our O&M revenue, or O&M levy, if you will. The little orange you see here in the middle is the amount of revenue that's attributable to TERS properties. And you can notice that this part here is getting larger, growing in size than it was back here in 2015 as the TERS takes up more value of the total, or makes up more value than the total. The green that you see there is the debt component over time.
Mike, that's like a 23% increase in TERS.
Yes, sir.
That's huge.
The TERS has grown at a very rapid pace, especially lately.
It creates a lot of value.
No, I understand that, but a tremendous amount of revenue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from this little graph, it's additional revenue of like a little over 10%.
That's correct.
That's big.
That's correct. So what the difference between here on 21 and 22 is a 6.5% increase from 22 to 21 in the O&M side. On the sales tax side, you heard me mention at a previous meeting how sales taxes have really skyrocketed here since 2019. I am using for next year a growth rate of 6% in sales tax over where we project to end the current year. So a still growing number that you see there. 6% is our 6-year average. The current year is around 12. The previous year was 14. The year before that was 1. So as I mentioned before, what's the real number? I'm choosing 6% just to kind of smooth out that ups and downs. And that's still pretty decent growth on the sales tax side. So you see that change that you have there.
Mike, I am a little concerned about 2022 and some of the euphoria wearing off and pin-up demand, and talking to a car dealer. April was their biggest month ever. Then came May, that was their biggest month ever with no inventory. And I just, there's got to be a little slowdown in sales. We last 2 years for sales tax revenue has just been unbelievable.
And almost unreal is maybe a good way of saying it. I mean, we know what's generating that. how long does that, and for lack of better terms, kind of artificial growth with stimulus money and the rest, pin up demand from a year of doing nothing? When does that wear off? That's a good concern. And that's exactly precisely why I don't really want to go out and say, okay, the 2-year average is 13%. So let's go another 30.
Well,
You're taking
And the-
about half, and I think that's probably about right.
Yeah.
And the 18 months staycation will be over. So other people will be getting our spending dollars, not
That's
just
correct.
local.
That's correct. So, I did raise this from where I started. I started at 5, but I think 6 is probably a good number for 22. Other general fund revenues, refuse collection are, because we have more people moving in, we have more people needing trash service. And so I'm increasing revenues by 215,000 there. Franchise fees, I budget those using averages, and it's averages of actuals. And so what that goes down just a little bit, only because I'm using a 2 or 3 year average, and it just brings down last year's numbers slightly. Remember, the legislature took away some telecom fees from us a couple of sessions ago, or last session, or whatever session before. So we're not getting as much telecom revenue as we used to. And last, interest rates are just pathetic. They're going to stay pathetic for quite a while. So we had to lower our interest income. That's general fund revenue. So now I want to talk about general fund expenditures, and I'm going to do that in 3 different ways. First is by function. So these that you see over here are kind of the functions that happen in the general fund. And 49% of our general fund budget goes towards public safety. Another, 11% towards solid waste and general government, kind of the admin type stuff. Culture and recreation, that's parks and rec and library, is 12% of our budget. Streets, around 10. Now I'd like to look at the same numbers on by a division level. So we're going from function to division level. And these are the divisions of the general government, of which we have many. This column you see here again is the amended budget after budget amendment number 1, where we stand today. This is where we expect to end. You can kind of do a quick comparison of where we expect to end compared to the current budget. This column here again is the 22 proposed budget for expenditures. And then here's the difference between 2022's budget and 21 amended budget. So the first one that jumps right out at you is city council and city management. So what I've done there is we have a division, which you'll see shortly, called other costs. Don't know what that is. The only 2 things that are in other cost division is the city council contributions that they make to other agencies and the city manager contingency. So clever me says, hey, let's get rid of the other cost division and let's put the city council's contributions money in the city council's budget, and let's put the city manager's contributions in the city manager's budget.
So
And that's the only reason those really go up.
So when you say contributions, what do you, a few examples?
Senior center, the HOP. What's the other ones? I have that. Dale County Public Health is the biggest one.
CISD, crossing guards, all those contributions.
All of those, yeah.
One contribution category. So there's no place else to put it, basically. There's a really designated amounts, by the city council, so it's.
And we've been doing that for some time. It's just now I'm putting it actually in the budget that you guys have, that you control, I'm putting it there. So, hey, going down the line further a little bit, hey, finance is doing its part. We reduced our budget by $21,000. Human resources increases 60,000. 30,000 of that is due to the compensation study that we want to do in fiscal year 22. Down here in patrol and support services in the PD budget, those are due to those rank structure changes that we did. We added a captain's position and moved some people around. And those types of things are what equates to that increase, most of that increase anyway.
Mike, what was city management?
City management, oops, sorry. This city management that you see there, $100,000 of that 124 is contingency. That's just with nothing that goes along with it. Our charter requires us to budget a contingency. It says the maximum that you can do for a contingency is 3% of your budget. We have been budgeting for a number of years, $100,000 in city manager contingency to cover those things that just might happen during the year. Doesn't have to be 100,000, but that's what we put in there, sir, right now.
So we went from 400 to 500 last year? We had $100,000 contingency?
That contingency is part of this amended budget right here. Well, no, actually it's not. No, I'm sorry. It's not in here. Remember, it was in other, here, let me show you. Let me just go forward. Hold tight. You see this other cost division?
Oh,
You see that right there? Now it's 0. And the only two things that were in this money right here was those two things, contributions and contingency. So for 22, there is no other cost division. Instead, that money goes back to city council and city management. That's what makes up those increases. Now, no real increase budgetarily, just moving where it is. Does that make sense? Okay. Moving on to other divisions.
So procedural question, when it comes to contingency, if we need to, I don't know, something blows up and we have to replace it, and then we do a budget amendment a lot of times, hey, we didn't really budget for that, we're just going to do that. If we find that the contingency could be used for that, that typically does not take council action.
No, it does not. If it were over 50, it'd have to come to you. But we have used the contingency for smaller things, but that's the stuff that you didn't think about, a $15,000 repair of something that just wasn't that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
But yes, you're correct. You could use that for those things.
Okay.
Moving on along, fire suppression went up $76,000. This is primarily due to the driver operator positions and some of those other rank type issues that we did. Now, this one I want to spend a little bit of time on because streets on a budget to budget basis actually declines by $595,000. But the reason that shows up that way is because this $2,085,000 in 21 was increased again by $1 million for that $750,000 street maintenance program and the $330,000 for the sidewalks. So we started fiscal year 21 with a budget in streets of $990,000. That's what our original adopted budget was. You see now that it goes up from 900, it goes up to 1.49, which happens to be the $500,000 that we're talking about that we already have included in the proposed budget for street maintenance next year.
So the other that's not the 5, so roughly the $1 million is just equipment and people that work in the streets departments, or is that, what is the other $1 million? If only 500,000 of streets is for street maintenance.
The rest of this number, 1.5?
Yes.
Yeah, it's personnel, it's
Okay, that's
equipment,
right.
operations,
Okay, gotcha.
supplies,
Yep.
you name it.
Understood. Yep.
Let's see what else I wanted. Does that make sense on street maintenance? That one's a little bit weird looking just because of what I'm comparing to. Let's see, nothing else terribly exciting on that one. The other costs we've already talked about. Solid waste collection, again, is going up because we have more trash service now. So essentially, the fiscal year 22 budget at $16,750,000 is essentially flat from the amended budget of $16,759,000. But that's a little bit deceiving as well because the originally adopted budget for 21 was 15.3. So short answer to this $1.3 million increase are two things. It's personnel and it's street maintenance. That's what it is. We'll talk about those in a little bit as we go. So now looking at expenditures at a little bit different level, now categories. These are really the categories we talk about: personnel, supplies, maintenance. And personnel makes up 59% of the general fund budget for fiscal year 22. That's actually a pretty good number because most cities, or many cities anyway, typically run 65 to 75% personnel. So we're actually less than that. So again, similar chart, but this one's by by expenditure category. So if you look at the change from fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 21, you can see that personnel goes up 651,000 on a budget to budget basis. Maintenance goes down 223, services go up. I'll talk about that shortly. So now, yes.
What was that other cost? I didn't.
That other cost is again, moving those contributions and things kind of into a different spot. It falls in one of these other categories.
Thank you.
So really just the significant stuff. We had shown you this before, but for fiscal year 22, personnel costs go up around 977,000 from where they are today, where people are today. And that's related to these big things here. So those rank structure changes that we made for police and fire, a full year of that's about $281,000. PD and fire also have civil service, so they get step increases on a regular basis. And that cost is $159,000. Everyone else falls under the non-civil service category, and we're currently looking at merit increases up to 3% for each employee. That's what's in the preliminary budget as it sits today. And that cost is almost $200,000, $196,000 for that up to 3%. Health insurance, we currently have a 15% in premiums. From what we have seen lately, that might be too low. We won't know that until July, I think is the time frame. So we may have to do some things to keep it close to that. I may have to look at some plan changes, et cetera. But if I'm telling you my gut's telling me that number's closer to 25. That's my gut. 25% would be what just my stomach's telling me. Again, I don't know. We won't know that until July. This is just, we budgeted 15 and got our fingers crossed. Because salaries and things are going up, property tax, payroll taxes, and retirement, those kind of things go up to about 177,000. So personnel cost is an extremely large chunk of that $1.3 million increase to our budget. Some of those smaller items that we had talked about, most of it's related to the budget amendment. Supplies goes down because we purchased this $105,000 worth of bunker gear in the current fiscal year 21, after that budget amendment, and we won't have to buy that next year. Again, for the first time in ever, we have $500,000 budgeted in your annual street maintenance for the annual street maintenance program. It's actually in there now, lower than the $750 we have in the budget amendment, but still more than we have had in the past.
Quick question there. That's just the base that's hard budgeted, because we've kind of determined that 750 to $1 million is what we really need in that category, right?
It's taken many years to get to the 500,000.
Yeah,
We certainly want to have that as a base, and certainly as budget adjustments occur as we go through the final process, that could be increased. If we get any leverage out of the federal funding, we'd love to be able to do it there. We don't think we're going to be able to, but again, that's just a starting point.
Well, that's what I just wanted to clarify, that's budgeting a base amount, a good base amount.
What's the current proposed budget for the work session?
Yeah.
Right, work session. Yeah, that's right.
But I just wanted to clarify, that's the base that we probably need to look at finding more to add to, like we've been doing.
Correct. We can do that. Again, trash collection goes up 210,000 as we have more folks needing trash service.
Isn't that offset by revenue?
It is. Both revenue and expenditures essentially they mirror each other. So all of the 200,000 in additional revenue gets offset by that 200,000 in cost. You're correct, sir. 100% correct. Also on the services side, we need to do a compensation study. That's about $30,000. And then every 10 years, we have to update our historic district survey study. And that's another $30,000 that we have budgeted in fiscal year 22. Again, we talked about pay plans and contingencies. And so the other thing, big things that go down are capital projects and capital project type transfers. Again, all of these were related to the budget amendment that we did. And so because that money doesn't exist any longer, those categories fall in total. That's the general fund. We did that very quickly. Okay, so now let's look at the debt service fund. We started the current fiscal year expecting to have to end 21 with about $30,000 in fund balance in the debt service fund. We may end up, because those delinquent collections have been higher than we thought, we may end up with around $73,000.
My personal soapbox
Yes,
here, Mike.
you're correct. No, I've got some answer for you here. I won't even leave this slide before I give you some answer. Okay, so property tax revenue is about $1.2 million. Our debt service is 1.18. So we could increase 32,000 or so maybe. That would leave right around 100,000 in fund balance. So here's what the plan is. What my plan is when it comes time to start calculating the tax rate, I will tell the appraisal district when they start doing our forms that we'll draw down this balance. My number is just maybe in 50,000 or so. I can't really go a whole lot more than that because I don't even know if I'm going to end up with that number right there yet, but it'll probably be close. So, I'm thinking 50 grand. If 80 is your number, tell me and I'll go 80. Did I hear that?
And the reason this gets me is because we'll end up with 105,000 in a debt service fund that is only used to pay our debt annually.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got an additional half a cent that we've collected from the taxpayer.
Mm-hmm. Understand. The one thing that, and it's not that big of a thing, the time comes later, many years down the road, and we'll monitor this for sure. If we issue debt during the year and we have to make that first debt payment before the end of the fiscal, say I've got to make an $80,000 interest payment before the fiscal rolls around, that's where this would come from. But that certainly wouldn't mean that we need to keep
You
up
could
huge
do a
balance.
budget amendment, right? And do a transfer?
You'd have to move money from the general fund.
Yeah, we'd have to move money from the general fund.
Correct.
Yeah.
And often
Yeah,
often those
it's
bonds
there.
are issued at a premium, so there's
Yeah.
additional funds.
So yes, so I'm hearing 80 will be the number that I use when we do that.
That's what I'm hearing.
That sounded like that. Well, last year, honestly,
Well, the thing is, what we want to do is make sure we put as much money to make money, right, in the general fund. So what we've done in the past, I think we've been moving some rates around, and anyway, just try to narrow that down.
Mhm.
And yeah,
No,
Get
I
it
understand.
close to zero.
Right, I understand perfectly. Last year, I apologize. I kind of put you in a box because we didn't have this little discussion of what you wanted to do before we actually went through the calculation process. So yes, now I know. Our debt outstanding at the end of this year will be $10,233,000. We have some very old stuff out here that's been there that let's see, 2003 matures in 2023, 2005 and 2025, 2008 and 2028.
do you have the fancy little graph, the little stacked graph that shows it? There you go. There it is.
Knew it was coming.
Yeah, no relief till early 2020.
So this little fancy graph shows you our debt payments and then what makes that up. So the blue that you see here is the principal component of that debt service. The green that you see there is the interest component of the debt service. And you see that we'll have for some time till 2028 or so, pretty much level debt service payments of 1.2 million. So how can that be? We have debt maturing, right? But between this time frame. Well, so what happened was, and this is usually the way it works, is even though some debt rolls off, say like the
Snowball.
2023 debt is 2003 debt will mature in 2023. It's $200,000 or so a year in debt service total. So what happens was when we did the refunding in 2019, we backfill that decline with that 2019 refunding when we structured that debt payment Essentially, you tell the financial advisor, you want level debt payments, and they'll work that into the structure. So in that example I'm giving you, in 2023, when the 2003 issue rolls off by 200 grand, the 2019 payment increases by $200,000, essentially.
Yep.
And so that's why we have that level debt payment. Not uncommon at all, that's when you structure debt, you'll do it with level payments throughout.
And none of those are like, if we decide to, I don't know, we win the lottery and we want to pay off a bill or two, that these are all pretty much locked through those.
Some of these old ones that I'd love to pay off do not have a call provision.
Okay.
And so I think the answer to your question is it'll be sometime maybe later when we start getting into those 6 years later. So we're talking 25 maybe that there was the first call.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Okay, that's the debt service fund. So now let's look quickly at our two internal service funds. One of those is the IT fund. We're going to have a budget of $893,000 in revenue in this fund. Now, this $893,000 in revenue comes from direct charges to other city departments. It's done through a cost allocation. So it also will have expenditures of $838,000 with an increase of fund balance of $55,000.
Mike, since that's charged to different accounts or areas, is there any reason to have a balance?
Yes, sir, it is. Okay, so essentially, this fund is the capital replacement fund for IT equipment, which we've had for a long time. And so that's why there's net income, because it's building a balance for future replacement items, like when you got to buy a $100,000 server 5 years from now type of thing. And that's why you're maintaining that balance. Exactly. 49% of this budget is maintenance. That's computer contracts. I mean, maintenance agreements and software licensing and things. The IT budget on this equipment, on these, what I'm trying to say, capital side, not capital side, the equipment type side goes up by 56,000. We have to buy many computers for police vehicles. $92,000 worth, I believe is the number, replacing MDTs in police vehicles. There's like 16,000 of laptops and things that we're replacing per our computer replacement plan. Software maintenance, that's that big category that we saw. We may get some new software for police. We already have some for HR. So those software costs may increase around $60,000 next year. Offsetting those two increases is a decline in capital outlay. In 21, we bought a lot of servers and switches and storage devices. We also laid fiber from this building to finance to make a better fiber connection. And so we won't have to do that next year. So capital outlay falls by $182,000 in fiscal year 22. The other internal service fund that we have is the building maintenance fund. Again, this money comes from charges to other divisions for maintaining city facilities. $458,000 for revenue, $418,000 for expenditures. 69% of that budget is personnel. Let's see what I have here. Personnel costs are going up about $45,000. We had some position changes. We have a new assistant director. We also have a salary allocation schedule that I modified a bit. What the salary allocation schedule, you'll maybe recall this conversation from last year, is we'll take an individual salary and spread that all over God's earth. And so I made some changes to that, which just changes the amount that gets charged to this fund. We did replace a whole lot of HVAC units in the current year. And because of that, HVAC expenses go down by $63,000.
That was part of a replacement plan.
Correct.
That you're basically saying we kind of got ahead of because we had to.
That's correct.
That's why that's going down.
Absolutely.
But it is a plan.
It is a plan. That is correct.
Okay.
The last fund I'll talk about tonight is the hotel motel fund, a special revenue fund that we have. And revenue that may come in next year at $183,000. I hope it does, because if it does, we've returned to pre-COVID levels. I believe our 2019 revenue was $189,000. So that'll be great if that comes in at that. Expenditures would be slightly less than that at $180,000, which would leave a fund balance of $389,000 in the hotel motel fund. 44% of this budget is what we call sponsorship, support, and historic preservation. That we'll talk about. Personnel is a smaller component there. So again, hopefully, with any luck, we'll reach pre-COVID levels with our revenue next year, up to 181,000. We do plan to do more advertising, to buy some signage and things. So our marketing costs go up by $16,000. We also hope to draw in more tourists by increasing tourism support by $12,500. Visitor center support, we're going to leave at $12,500. That's what we've done, I think, the last couple of years for the visitor center. And we also had planned to, in 21, and it's one of those things that we pulled out as we were going conservative last year, hotel motel funding for the standpipe restoration project. We're going to defer that again until fiscal year 23, at least. We were hoping for some grant funding there, and I don't believe that grant came in. So
Do you remember how much the estimate was to do the preservation standpipe?
I think the number was 240,000, but I don't know if that's changed. That's what we had in there previously.
Okay. I knew you had a number at one time, but I didn't remember it. Thank you.
So in summary, we have a growing property tax base. And at 63 cents, that property tax base will continue to support our current service levels. Sales tax revenue is still going up. Some of the big things that we have in the general fund budget, again, those public safety items, driver operator, some of those other operational enhancements. Merit increases for employees at 3%, up to 3%. We finally have that 500,000 budgeted in street maintenance. And then the contributions number for next year is $140,000. One of the bigger ones there is $25,000 for the Belton area seniors. And that's an increase from 10,000, which is what it's been historically. Now this other one, here's some other kind of good news here. This $30,000 for Hill Country Transit. The HOP received stimulus money, enough stimulus money that it does not have to charge us next year. So in the budget that you'll see as we go forward to adopt, I'll take that $30,000 out of the expenditures for contributions is where that goes. Now, what I'll also share with you though, is that, okay, so we've included all of these things, but there were, you've heard on the strategic plan, some of the personnel needs and keeping up compensation and things. You know, there were several departments that asked about or requested additional personnel. One of my departments was one of those. Those kind of things aren't in here. We wanted to stay with 977 at first. But that's not included in that rate of 63 cents. Some of those other compensation things, we will do a compensation study in 22. Obviously, when you get that study, you don't want to just put it on the shelf. You have to try to implement that study to some manner. Some of those things we'll have to work into a 63 cent tax rate or something like that. Final things, debt service remains stable at $1.2 million. Those internal service funds, again, both of those funds actually went down in expenditures from 2021 a little bit. And hopefully the hotel motel fund has reached those pre-pandemic levels. Upcoming things for us. At your next council meeting, I'm going to talk about these funds, water, sewer, drainage, EDC, and TERS. Both of those boards have approved their budgets already. So I'm going to bring back those budgets for you to take a peek at. We need to talk about our CIP in an upcoming meeting. Again, at that point, we're going to talk about some of that general fund money, fund balance. Strategic plan update, need to adopt that. Budget calendar, just to give you a heads up there, they're telling us we should get a certified roll around July the 20th. So that's a couple of days early. At that time, then I can really start looking at real numbers and bring back to you really a real property tax rate to kind of look at. Some of those other things that we were going to talk about were, I can't remember now.
Fund balance policy and the ARP funding were the other two items that we wanted to just remind you, we'll be bringing those back to you for discussion in a very near future.
So that's where I'll leave you with this one. I'd be happy to answer any questions, talk about the fiscal year 22 budget.
One question. So last year, I don't think I saw this slide in this presentation. Maybe it'll be closer to the end, but when you're talking about the revenue, it was, 7.2% property value increase. I don't think, if I remember right last year, and I'm not the financial whiz up here, but I think the number when it moved out to actual revenue increase was more than that. So
Correct.
what is that revenue increase that we have based on that 7.2?
We rolled but we pulled the rate. It's the total tax collected versus, so what we did is we moved our revenue, our collection down.
Right, I get that, but I'm saying in the projection, the values went up 7.2%. Went up more than that, it was 14%
Last year?
last year. But the actual revenue from that was a higher percentage than even that. And then that's why we did pull
On the O&M side, probably,
yeah, we
that it would
pulled
have
the
to be is what we
collection.
would have been looking
We
at.
lowered the rate,
To be no new revenue
right,
rate.
Right,
but it's not a 7.2
Yeah,
and then a
so-
7.2 increase in revenue.
right. So
What's
here's
the
the
increase in
way it'll
revenue?
work is what I'm giving you tonight is just their estimate of values. I take their estimate of values and build revenue upon it using 63 cents, the current tax rate. Once we get the certified roll, then we're going to see, yes, how much more values are. And then we can do one of two things. You can either stay at, say, 63 cents, making up something, and then we bring in more revenue or less revenue, depending upon what the actual value is, or we adjust that rate accordingly or add more expenses or however you want to do that. But we won't be able to do that until I get a final number for sure on that, on the
Well,
certified.
that's why I was saying maybe we don't have that number yet, and that's maybe not why it's in your presentation.
That's correct. I don't,
But
I'm
I
guessing.
distinctly remember last year in the presentation, and it may have been toward the end, where when that really stood out, it was like, hey, our values have gone up this much, and then our revenue's gone up even more, and then that's what spurred that whole conversation of
Yeah,
bringing
and-
that back down.
We had that one table we hashed and rehashed and hashed and rehashed. I'd have to go back and look at the specific.
I just want to make sure that
Yes.
table's coming.
Yes, it will.
'Cause
When we have it,
It wasn't.
I see.
It wasn't here tonight.
When we start talking tax rates, that's when we're.
That was a long windup.
Yeah. Was it now?
And then he brought the heat.
Well, it might not hurt to not wait till then to see that.
Well, the problem is I can't tell you, like, the biggest component there is TERS.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that number is yet. And even certified is going to be fairly close to what they're saying, I suppose. That's them telling me the value. I'm not just kind of making my own number. But that's split because the TERS is such a large component of that number.
And you're saying
It's-
TERS really drives that difference.
Well, not necessarily
Between
drives the
the-
difference. It's the property value increases that drives the difference. But if, say, the TERS value happens to be increasing at a greater rate than the regular base value.
And
you
it
know,
has
like
been,
that,
which has been.
and it has been, then it's skewed, then I'm having to contribute more to the TERS, which is coming out of that O&M number, the net.
Yeah.
So yeah, until I really get that, I
Plus you
can't-
have protests underway that could affect the overall.
Yeah.
And so that could have some.
Some are
impact in
successful,
bringing-
some aren't.
Some-
So,
correct. This is the
Okay.
best information we have right now based upon the preliminary values and the estimated value of 63 cents as a tax rate. So as more becomes available, we'll get a new sales tax number.
I get another sales tax number tomorrow.
Mhm.
So at that time, I update revenues. I'll do one more revenue pass, either up or down. And then modify, those revenue figures a little bit, if it's material. I mean, I'm maybe not $1,000 or here. But expenditures are kind of expenditures now because we've met with department heads. This is what they're proposing unless you tell us otherwise.
So quick comment in a grown-up Christmas list. So quick comment is, again, thank you and all the staff for doing all the work that you guys have done. As you said, you guys have held the line on personnel and hiring at the right time and making sure we hire the right people and really kind of squeezing the budget. So again, thank you for doing that. The grown-up Christmas list is one is as we look at where we are with annexation and really kind of staying where we are. It's kind of like never upgrading your house, just staying in the first house you ever built. And if you really look at that, as your income increases, you can do better things with your house and you don't have to borrow as much. And so I think that as we grow as a city and revenues, but we're not really extending our base, and we've got these several budgets that we'll look at with BEDC and TERS, I think it'd be really nice to have our tax rate that we're collecting on property taxes for the general fund to go more general fund and less borrowed money.
Mm-hmm.
And because I don't know what the number is this year, 200,000 or 150 or 300,000 in interest is
Right.
It'd be really nice to have that go straight into. So I think we should go for the general fund, pay as you go. We would still borrow, our economic engine is going to be our water sewer. It's going to be things in the TERS. It's going to be things with BEDC as they look at expansion and those kind of things that we might borrow money there. But I think in the general fund, I think we should, that's grown up Christmas list. So that's one. The other one is I really think it's really great that we're doing what we're doing with the police and fire, also looking at the wages of the city. Also, those are the things that we should be able to focus on since we're not annexing and growing. We can focus on execution, and I think we should do that. In doing that, it'd be nice, and I don't know what the number is right now we have with the grant from the 2020 COVID stuff. Is it 2 million, 3 million, something like that?
4.98.
4.98. It'd be
It went up to 5.6.
okay.
Oh, did it? Oh,
So 5.6,
News to the finance guy.
and we've got 3 years to use the 5.6. I think what we should, and again, I don't know how we can use that, but I think public health and public safety is probably one of those. We used to, once upon a time, we've used federal grants to help us hire some firemen or hire some police officers, and then the funding went down over time. It'd be really nice to model that 5.6 to really help fund the $1 million that we're looking at this year for those increases, is using that fund to help us grow into that over the next 3 years. So that way it would give us a little more room. So that's another one, is if we could use those funds to help those increases and not tax the general fund. And then the final one, dang, I am getting old. So the final one is that, and yeah, it's obviously was the most important one because I forgot it.
Last meeting, you mentioned streets. And
Thank you so much. That's exactly where it was going.
John just brought that
That's
up earlier.
yeah. So that's where I was going is using is go back up to the $1 million. I mean, we all call. I mean, it's if we don't pay $1 million per year, then if we pay, it's just debt. It's just a different type of debt. So it's a technical debt that we're paying, and we're not really accruing on the books because it's one that also earns interest. The longer you wait, it's delayed. Absolutely. So I think, so I think that if we could maybe use some of the TERS to help with the personnel, we can use some of the personnel money that we're talking about to help fund the streets. And again, keep it the same rate that you proposed, or maybe even down a little bit, and still do everything like we did last year. So thank you.
Well, I
Thanks
think
for the
just
reminder.
to hit on his point from last meeting too, and I don't know your thoughts on this, but I think Angela told us you need like a jump start and then $1 million a year to maintain. And I don't know, if you don't get the jump start, maybe when we start looking at COs or, things like that, we might think about that, throwing a little bit in for that piece for a little bit of a jump start. But if you're just going to start at $1 million and get to $1 million and stay at $1 million, then maybe it just takes longer. It takes longer to get where you need to be without the jump start.
Well, you'll see the TERS budget and some of the project lists there, but there's a lot of things in the TERS that are probably going to help with the jump start. Because, I mean, when we look at Connell and some of those things, there's a lot of growth areas and also maintenance areas that I think the TERS can help shoulder some of the those kinds of
Like do
things.
some new build, rebuild.
Other questions or comments?
Just appreciate the effort, Mike, detail, and ask that you continue to sharpen your pencil and look at collection rate.
I almost brought a sharpened pencil. Today. I really did.
Honestly, the debt service fund,
Mhm.
and my goal is there to have the minimum balance that we can have, and that means we've just been so efficient for our taxpayers. And even look at the maintenance fund. If those dollars aren't used, that's another half cent there. They could go to M&O. And so continue to pour over this, and for some crazy reason, I kind of enjoy it. But really appreciate your detail and the numbers, and appreciate your quick response to the emails that I send.
Sure.
There's a lot little that goes on behind the scenes too.
Thank you. That's what I'm here for.
So, thank you.
Glad to help.
Anybody else? And I echo what John and David have said, and you guys' point about the streets, and certainly appreciate the work you've done so far and look forward to what we can do with that 5.6 million, if we ever get it, and perhaps even more stimulus money in terms of infrastructure from the feds. I'm just, it's still a possibility. So lots of exciting things. And I know we've got streets that we postponed that need to be addressed, whether it's $1 million or a jump start, as Guy mentioned, or whatever. But I drive around frequently, and Lord knows we've got some streets that are way past their sell-by date, to say the least. So anyway, we appreciate what you've done so far and look forward to more information into all those budget meetings that we get to have in the
That's right.
spring.
A little smoother than that one last year, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Well
it.
done. Well done.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Any other comments? If not, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.